I was sitting alone at my corner table staring at the photograph I had carried for 30 years when a woman sat down across from me without asking. She looked at the photograph and said, "You're still looking for her." She placed a folder on the table. "Everything about the disappearance is in here." I asked how she could possibly know. She looked straight at me. "Because I'm the little girl in that photograph." My hands went cold. Before I could speak, she said one more thing, and 30 years of certainty collapsed. If you are ready to see how far this betrayal goes, subscribe to Dad Family Revenge. I am incredibly grateful to have you here. Let's build our community. Comment below with the city or country you are watching from. Note: this narrative contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and learning. Any resemblance to actual people or settings is coincidental, but the core message remains highly valuable. The photograph was the first thing I put on the table every morning. Before the coffee, before the newspaper, before anything else. I'd been doing it for 30 years, and the waitresses at Maple Street Bakery had long stopped asking about it. They just brought my black coffee without a word and left me to my corner booth by the window, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that nobody else ever seemed to want. The girl in the photograph was 3 years old. She had her mother's eyes, dark and wide and full of something that looked like wonder, even in a still image. She was sitting on a park bench laughing at something off camera, her small fists wrapped around a half-eaten pretzel. I had taken that picture on a Sunday afternoon in March of 1995, 8 months before the worst day of my life. I was 65 years old now, retired, a former private investigator who had spent 3 decades finding other people's missing children while failing to find his own. The irony had never been lost on me. I carried it the way you carry a stone in your shoe, always there, always pressing something you learn to walk around, but never fully forget. Salem, Oregon in October had a particular quality of light I had always loved even after everything. The mornings came in slow and golden through the bakery's front windows, catching the steam from the coffee cups and turning the whole place amber. On any other day I might have noticed that. But I was looking at her face in the photograph the way I did every morning, running my thumb along the worn edge of the print. The way a man fingers a rosary bead, not because he expects a miracle, but because the motion itself is the only prayer he has left. That was when she sat down across from me. I hadn't heard her approach. One moment the chair was empty, and the next there was a woman in it, early 30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a gray wool coat that was slightly too large for her shoulders. She didn't ask if the seat was taken. She didn't apologize for interrupting. She just settled into the chair like she had been planning to sit there for a very long time. My hand moved on instinct, sliding the photograph closer to my side of the table. 30 years as a PI had left me with habits I couldn't shake, and protecting evidence was one of them. "You're still looking for her," the woman said. It wasn't a question. I looked up at her properly for the first time. Her eyes were dark and steady, and there was something in them I couldn't immediately name. Not hostility, not warmth, but a kind of fierce, controlled pressure, like a door being held shut from the inside. "I don't believe I know you," I said. My voice came out careful and flat, the way it always did when I was paying close attention. She reached into the canvas bag beside her and placed a thick manila folder on the table between us. It landed with a soft, deliberate weight, the way things land when someone has been carrying them for a very long time. "Everything about the disappearance 30 years ago is in here," she said. "Police reports, witness statements, the intake forms from the foster care system, the name of the man who drove the car." My chest tightened so sharply that for a moment I couldn't draw a full breath. I had heard false leads before, dozens of them over the years, from well-meaning strangers and outright con artists alike. I had learned to keep my face still through all of them. But the specificity of what she'd just said, the foster care system, the man who drove the car, those were details that had never appeared in any newspaper, any public record, any document I had ever shared with anyone outside of law enforcement. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice was steady. My hands were not. She looked at the photograph on the table, my photograph, my daughter, my March afternoon in 1995, and something moved across her face too fast for me to catch it. Then she looked back at me and her chin lifted slightly, and I saw it. Her mother's eyes, dark and wide, the same exact shape, the same depth, 30 years older than the last time I had seen them, but unmistakable to a man who had spent every morning of those 30 years staring at a photograph of the woman who had them first. "Because I'm the little girl in that photograph," she said. The bakery kept going around me. Someone laughed at the counter. The espresso machine hissed. A chair scraped against the tile floor. The world continued at its ordinary pace while mine came to a complete and total stop. I pressed my palm flat against the table to steady myself. I looked at her face, really looked the way I had trained myself to look at faces, reading the architecture of bone and expression for truth or deception. I saw her mother's jaw. I saw the small scar above her left eyebrow that had come from a fall off the back porch steps when she was 2.5 years old. I had held a dish towel to that cut for 20 minutes while my wife called the doctor. My throat closed entirely. "I need you to say that again," I managed. She held my gaze without flinching. Her hands were flat on the folder between us, and I noticed they weren't entirely steady either. "My name is Rebecca," she said, "and I have been waiting a very long time to sit across from you." Rebecca. I had spoken that name out loud every single day for 30 years. Into empty rooms, into case files, into the dark quiet of 3 in the morning when sleep refused to come. I had spoken it so many times that it had stopped feeling like a word and started feeling like breathing, something I did without thinking, something I could not stop doing even when it hurt. And now someone was saying it back to me from across a bakery table, and I did not know what to do with my hands. I set them flat on the table, picked up my coffee cup, put it down without drinking. The woman Rebecca, she had said, Rebecca watched me with those eyes that belonged to a face I had buried 29 years ago, and she did not rush me. Whatever she had come here to do, she was willing to wait another few minutes for me to remember how to function. "The scar," I said finally. My voice came out rough, scraped clean of everything except the question. "Above your left eyebrow. How did you get it?" Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, more like recognition that a test was being administered, and she had been expecting it. "I don't remember," she said. "I was told I fell. The people who raised me said it happened before I came to them." "You fell off the back porch steps," I said. "August of 1994. You were trying to follow the neighbor's cat through the gap in the railing. I held a dish towel against it for 20 minutes because your mother was on the phone with the doctor and someone had to keep pressure on it." I stopped, steadied myself. "You cried until you heard her voice. Then you stopped immediately." Rebecca's jaw tightened. A muscle moved in her throat. She looked down at the folder between us and pressed her palm against the cover, the way people press their hands against things they need to feel are solid. "I need to show you something," she said, and opened it. The first page was a photocopy of a police report. Case number, date, location, Hargrove Park, Salem, Oregon, November 14th, 1995. I knew every word of that report by memory. I had read it so many times the original had worn soft at the folds. But seeing it here printed and placed in front of me by the hands of the child who had been at the center of it made the room tilt slightly on its axis. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "I've been collecting documents for 3 years," she said. "Police records, court filings, foster care intake forms." She turned to the next page, a grainy photocopy of a child's intake photograph, a little girl with dark hair and a blank expression staring at a camera like she didn't understand why she was being photographed. A date stamp in the corner read, December 1995. That's me. 6 weeks after the park. My chest cracked open so quietly that I almost didn't notice it happening. I remembered that November afternoon with the particular merciless clarity that trauma preserves its worst moments in. Eleanor had suggested the outing a family afternoon. She'd said fresh air would do us all good. Rebecca had been bundled into her red coat, the one with the wooden buttons she liked to twist. We had been at the park for maybe 40 minutes when Eleanor called my name from across the path, said she'd turned her ankle on the gravel, needed my arm to steady herself. I had looked away for less than 2 minutes. When I turned back, Rebecca was gone. The police had investigated for 7 months. They had interviewed everyone who had been in that park. They had pulled security footage from the surrounding streets and found nothing useful. The lead detective had sat across from me in a gray office and told me with the careful kindness of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis that children taken under those circumstances rarely came home. I had never stopped looking anyway. "They told me you gave up," Rebecca said. Her voice was controlled, but something underneath it was not. "The people who raised me. They said you searched for a while and then you moved on. That you had a new life and didn't want the complication." "That is a lie," I said. The words came out with a quietness that surprised even me. Not anger, something deeper and colder than anger. "I have never stopped looking for you. Not for one day." She reached into the folder again and produced a letter. Single page, handwritten, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges. She placed it on the table and turned it to face me without speaking. I recognized the handwriting before I read a single word. My hands went cold. I knew that particular slant, that way of looping the letter G, the slight leftward lean that appeared whenever the writer was moving quickly. I had watched those same letters form on grocery lists and birthday cards and the notepad by our kitchen phone for 11 years of marriage. It was Eleanor's handwriting. The letter was dated March of 2003, 8 years after Rebecca disappeared. It was addressed to a family in Portland, and it explained in warm and reasonable language that Rebecca's biological father had in fact located her some time ago, had chosen not to make contact, and wished for the current arrangement to continue undisturbed. It was signed with a name I didn't recognize, but the handwriting was my wife's. I read it twice. Then I set it down very carefully, the way you set down something that might shatter if it hits the table wrong. "She knew," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, heavy and wrong-shaped. "In 2003, she already knew where you were." Rebecca watched my face with an expression I couldn't fully read. There was grief in it, I thought, but there was something else too, something harder and more purposeful that she was keeping very close to the surface. "I got that letter when I was 22, she said. "Someone mailed it to me anonymously. No return address. I thought for a long time it was a mistake." She paused. "Then I got a second one. And a third." Outside the bakery window, a woman pushed a stroller past on the sidewalk, perfectly ordinary, perfectly unaware. The espresso machine hissed again. Someone dropped a spoon. I picked up the letter one more time and looked at the handwriting that had signed our anniversary cards for over 2 decades. "Eleanor," I said. Not a question, not an accusation. Just the name placed into the air between us like an object neither of us wanted to touch. Rebecca said nothing. But her eyes, her mother's eyes, didn't look away from mine for a single second. I had driven past 1,000 houses on 1,000 cases over 35 years, and I had learned to read them the way other people read faces. The way a porch light left on in daylight told you someone inside was afraid of the dark. The way an overgrown mailbox told you the person collecting the letters had stopped caring about what arrived. My own house on Caldwell Street told anyone who looked closely enough that the man living inside had never fully unpacked from a grief he'd moved into 3 decades ago. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat and looked at it through the windshield without speaking. A white 2-story with green shutters, a maple tree in the front yard that had grown considerably since 1995, and a mailbox at the end of the front walk with 2 names stenciled on the side in black paint. My name and hers. "You kept my name on the mailbox," she said. "I never took it down," I said. She turned to look at me, and I kept my eyes on the house because I did not trust what my face was doing at that particular moment. The front door opened before we reached the porch steps. Eleanor had always had an instinct for arrivals. In 22 years of marriage, she had never once failed to appear at the door within 30 seconds of a car pulling into the driveway. I had found it charming once. Standing on my own front walk with my long-lost daughter beside me, I found myself examining that instinct for the first time with the detached attention I should have been paying to it for years. She was 62, Eleanor, and she wore it the way certain women wear age, carefully, deliberately, with good lighting always somehow in her favor. Silver hair cut short and neat, a pale blue cardigan, reading glasses pushed up on her head like she'd been interrupted mid-sentence. She stood in the doorway with her hand on the frame and looked at Rebecca with an expression of perfect, breathless surprise. "Oh my God," she said. Her voice broke on the last word in a way that sounded exactly like a woman who had just seen a miracle. "Oh, Vincent." She pressed her fingers to her mouth. Her eyes filled. She came down the porch steps and pulled Rebecca into her arms before the girl had a chance to respond. Rebecca's body went rigid for just a fraction of a second. I felt it more than saw it, that involuntary stiffening of someone being touched by a stranger. And then she allowed the embrace, her arms coming up slowly, her chin dropping to Eleanor's shoulder. Over Eleanor's shoulder, Rebecca's eyes found mine. I had interviewed enough people in my career to know what it looks like when someone is performing an emotion rather than feeling it. The slight over-precision of the movements, the awareness of being observed that leaks through even the most practiced expressions. Eleanor's grief looked real. It probably was real in the complicated way that guilty people's emotions are often real, tangled up with the thing they did, until even they can't fully separate the feeling from the crime. But Rebecca's eyes looking at me across Eleanor's shoulder were absolutely and entirely unreadable. "Come inside," Eleanor said, pulling back and holding Rebecca at arm's length, studying her face the way you study a painting you've waited a long time to see in person. "Come in, let me look at you. You have your mother's eyes. Did anyone ever tell you that?" The question landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. I watched Eleanor's face as she said it. Watched for the flicker. There was none. She ushered us into the kitchen, put the kettle on, talked steadily about the drive, about the weather, turning about how we must both be exhausted. She had a gift for filling silence that I had always appreciated and was now reconsidering in its entirety. While Eleanor stood at the counter with her back to us, I leaned slightly toward Rebecca and said very quietly, "The letter. Don't mention it yet." Rebecca looked at me. A muscle moved in her jaw. She gave the smallest possible nod. Later, after Eleanor had gone to make up the guest room, I took Rebecca upstairs to the room at the end of the hall. The door was closed the way it had been closed every day for 30 years. I put my hand on the knob and held it there for a moment before I turned it. The room was exactly as it had been in November of 1995. The small white bed with the yellow quilt. The shelf of picture books and stuffed animals arranged the way a 3-year-old arranges things, which is to say, without any particular logic, but with absolute conviction. a mobile of painted wooden stars hanging from the ceiling hook, turning very slightly in the air from the opened door. Rebecca stepped inside and stopped. She stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, taking in each detail with the concentrated attention of someone trying to memorize something they're afraid will disappear. She touched the edge of the bookshelf with her fingertips. She looked at the mobile. She looked at the small framed photograph on the nightstand, her mother holding a newborn smiling at the camera with the exhausted and total joy of a woman who has no idea what is coming. "She died the night I was born," Rebecca said. "Not a question." "Hemorrhage," I said. The word still cost me something every time I said it out loud. "She held you for 4 hours first. She knew something was wrong, and she didn't tell anyone because she wanted those 4 hours." Rebecca's hand dropped from the bookshelf. She pressed it flat against her sternum, against her chest, like she was trying to hold something in. "I never knew her," she said. "No," I said. "But she knew you. She wrote you a letter the night before you were born, when she was still in the hospital. I've kept it. I always meant to." My voice stopped working for a moment. I cleared my throat. "It's yours whenever you want it." Rebecca turned to look at me, and for the first time since she'd sat down across from me in the bakery that morning, the controlled surface of her expression cracked open just enough for me to see something genuine moving underneath it. Something that looked like longing so old, it had calcified into a shape she'd stopped noticing she was carrying. Then her eyes shifted to the window. Below in the backyard, Eleanor stood with her phone pressed to her ear. Her back was to the house, her shoulders angled away, the posture of someone ensuring they won't be overheard. I watched my wife of 22 years standing in my backyard on the phone at dusk, and I thought about a letter written in her handwriting in the year 2003, and I felt the cold, particular clarity that had always arrived when a case stopped being confusing and started being solvable. Through the glass, faint but unmistakable, Eleanor's voice carried on the evening air. "She's here," I heard. "The next part starts now." The morning after Rebecca came home, I woke up at 5:15 the way I always did, made coffee the way I always did, and stood at the kitchen window watching the maple tree in the front yard the way I always did. Everything exactly the same as 30 years of mornings before it. Except that upstairs in the guest room at the end of the hall, my daughter was sleeping under my roof for the first time since she was 3 years old. I had not slept. I was not sure I would sleep again for some time. By the time the coffee had brewed, Rebecca was already at the kitchen table. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt I didn't recognize, her hair loose, both hands wrapped around a mug she'd found in the cabinet above the sink. She looked younger without the careful composure she'd worn at the bakery. She also looked exhausted in a way that went considerably deeper than one sleepless night. "You found the good mugs," I said. "The ones in the back," she said. "Behind the ones that match." I sat down across from her. Outside, the maple was turning the leaves, going orange and red at the edges, and the early light came through the window at an angle that caught the steam rising from both our cups and turned it gold. For a moment, neither of us felt the need to fill that space with words, which surprised me because I had expected awkwardness and instead found something that felt almost like its opposite. "Tell me about her," Rebecca said. I didn't have to ask who she meant. "She was stubborn," I said. "Genuinely, completely stubborn in a way that made her very good at her job and occasionally very difficult to live with. She was a nurse. Night shifts, mostly because she said the hospital had a different quality at night. Quieter, more honest, somehow." I turned my coffee cup in my hands. She used to bring home crossword puzzles from the break room and leave them half-finished on the kitchen counter. I'd finish them after she went to sleep. We never talked about it, but we both knew. Rebecca's expression did something complicated. "She sounds real," she said. When people tell me about her, she mostly sounds like a story, but that sounds real. She was the most real person I ever knew, I said. The back door rattled once sharply before it opened the particular knock and enter that I had been hearing for 14 years and had never once managed to convince its owner was not an acceptable substitute for waiting to be invited in. Harold Briggs came through my back door the way he always did, carrying 2 paper bags from the bakery down the street and wearing the brown corduroy jacket he'd owned since the mid-90s. He was 71 years old, built like a man who had spent 40 years doing physical work before retirement, made him take up chess instead, with a white beard he kept meaning to trim and sharp blue eyes that missed very little. He stopped when he saw Rebecca. "Well," he said. He set the bags down on the counter with the careful deliberateness of a man buying himself time to adjust. "Well, I'll be." He looked at me. "Is this Harold?" I said, "This is Rebecca, my daughter." Harold Briggs, who had sat across a chessboard from me through 3 marriages, 2 bypass surgeries between us, and more bad news than either of us cared to count, pulled out the chair beside Rebecca and sat down without being asked. He looked at her face for a long moment, with the unhurried attention of someone who has earned the right to take things slowly. "You've got your daddy's forehead," he said finally, "and something around the eyes that isn't him at all." He extended his hand. "Harold Briggs. I live next door. I apologize in advance for the hours I keep." Rebecca shook his hand. Something in her shoulders eased slightly, some small tension releasing that she might not have known she was holding. "He talks about you," Harold said. "Has for as long as I've known him. Every Saturday morning first move of the game without fail, he tells me something about you. What you used to eat for breakfast, what your favorite color was, whether you'd liked dogs or cats." He glanced at me. "He never let you become past tense." My throat tightened in a way I had not anticipated. Rebecca looked down at her coffee cup. Her fingers pressed into the ceramic, and I watched her work to keep her face still in the practiced way of someone who has spent a long time not letting people see what hits them. After Harold had distributed the bakery bags and installed himself comfortably at my kitchen table, as if he had been doing so his entire life, he excused himself to use the restroom, and Rebecca and I were alone again. She picked up her phone from the table, glanced at the screen, and began typing quickly with her thumbs. I was carrying a tray of mugs to the counter and caught the motion in my peripheral vision. Not the message itself, just the speed of it, the slight angle of her body away from me, the way she set the phone face down on the table the moment she heard my footstep behind her. 35 years of reading people. I set the mugs in the sink and kept my back to her for a moment longer than necessary. "Harold's going to want a rematch," I said. "I beat him 3 games in a row last Saturday. He hasn't recovered." "How long has he lived next door?" Rebecca asked. Her voice was perfectly even. 14 years, I said. I turned around. She was looking at me directly, both hands visible on the table phone face down beside her left elbow. "He moved in about 6 months after his wife passed. We started playing chess because neither of us had anything better to do at 6 in the morning." She nodded. She picked up her coffee cup. She did not pick up her phone. That night, after Harold had gone home and Eleanor had retired early, with a headache she'd mentioned twice more than necessary, I sat in my office going through old case files with the door closed. On the shelf above my desk, between a dictionary and a copy of Oregon statutes from 2008, I kept a small battery-operated radio that I had owned since 1987. I turned it on low and sat in the sound of it, and thought about a phone face down on a kitchen table and a message typed with the urgent speed of someone who could not wait until they were alone. I thought about Eleanor's voice through a window the evening before. The next part starts now. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out the original case file from 1995. Set it on the desk in front of me. Put my hands flat on the cover. Then I started reading from the beginning. 3 weeks was long enough to establish a routine, and short enough that the routine still felt fragile, like something that could be undone by a single wrong word or a door closed at the wrong moment. Rebecca had settled into the guest room with a quietness that I found difficult to read. She helped with dinner without being asked. She sat with me in the evenings while I watched the news, contributing occasional dry observations about the anchors that made me laugh before I'd decided to. She called Harold by his first name after the second day and had beaten him at chess twice, which he pretended to find annoying and obviously did not. To anyone looking in through the window, we would have appeared to be a family finding its footing. I had been a private investigator for 35 years. I knew what finding your footing looked like. I also knew what its imitation looked like, and I was no longer entirely certain which one I was watching. The inconsistencies were small at first. The kind of thing you'd dismiss as misremembering if you weren't paying close attention. Rebecca had told me at the bakery that she'd been taken directly to Portland after the park. The foster care intake form in her file listed her initial placement as a facility in Eugene, 60 miles south of Portland, for a period of approximately 6 weeks before she was transferred north. When I mentioned Portland offhandedly one evening, asking if she'd known the Hawthorne neighborhood, she said yes immediately and described it in convincing detail. But the detail was too polished, too complete. The way a person describes a place they have researched rather than a place they have lived. I wrote it down in the notebook I had started keeping in my desk drawer and said nothing. The second inconsistency was smaller. She had described her foster family as having 2 dogs, black Labradors named Hank, and something she couldn't remember. The intake form listed the foster address as a residence with a strict no pets policy standard practice for that particular agency in the mid-90s, noted explicitly in their guidelines. It could have been a rule they bent. It could have been a different family she was remembering. It could have been nothing. I wrote it down and said nothing. On a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week, my office phone rang while Eleanor was at her garden club meeting and Rebecca had gone to pick up groceries. I answered on the 2nd ring. "Mr. Morgan?" The voice was quiet, careful with the particular tension of someone who has checked over their shoulder before dialing. "It's Gary Young, from the office." Gary Young had been my company's head accountant for 7 years. He was 34 years old, methodical, to the point of being occasionally maddening, and constitutionally incapable of rounding a number. He was also in 7 years the only employee who had never once tried to tell me what I wanted to hear. "Gary," I said, "what's wrong?" It wasn't a question. His voice had already told me something was wrong. "I've been going over the quarterly accounts," he said. "There are transfers I can't reconcile. Regular amounts moving to an external account I don't have documentation for. They've been happening for a long time, Mr. Morgan. I only found them because I was cross-referencing against the archived records going back to the original setup." He stopped. When he continued, his voice had dropped further. "Mrs. Eleanor has been the authorizing signature on every single one. I can't say more right now. I think someone may be monitoring the office email." He paused. "I shouldn't have called on this line either. I'm sorry. I thought you should know." "How long?" I said. "The earliest one I've found is from March of 1996, he said. 4 months after." He stopped himself. 4 months after Rebecca disappeared. "Don't do anything," I said. "Don't print anything, don't move anything, don't mention this to anyone. I'll come to the office Thursday morning at 7 before anyone else arrives." "Yes, sir," he said. And then quietly, "Mr. Morgan, be careful." The line went dead. I sat at my desk with the phone in my hand for a long moment. March of 1996. 4 months after the park. A transfer to an external account authorized by Eleanor, regular and deliberate running, now for 28 years without my knowledge. I put the phone down and opened the bottom drawer where I kept the case file. I had been reading through it in the evenings slowly, the way you reread a book you thought you understood and find that you missed something important the first time. I found the page I had marked 2 nights before, witness statements from the afternoon of November 14th, 1995. 12 witnesses had been interviewed. Most had seen nothing useful. But on page 31 I found a statement from a woman who had been walking her dog along the eastern path. She had noticed a dark blue sedan parked on the service road, adjacent to the park engine running for approximately 20 minutes before the reported time of the disappearance. She had thought it odd, but not alarming. The sedan had left heading west at approximately 4:22 in the afternoon. The detective's follow-up note clipped to the statement read, "Unable to trace. Partial plate only. No further leads." I had read this statement 100 times over 30 years, but I had never read the sentence beneath the detective's note written in different ink added later, which read, "Vehicle description matches, 1994 Volvo wagon, dark blue. Registered owner, E. Hargrove." E. Hargrove. Eleanor's maiden name was Hargrove. I closed the file. I pressed both palms flat on the cover. My heart was doing something I hadn't felt it do in years, not the dull, steady ache of old grief, but the sharp, accelerating rhythm of a man who has just realized that the case he has been working for 30 years was never a cold case at all. That evening before dinner, I went to the utility closet off the kitchen hallway, where I had installed a small camera mount 14 years ago after a string of neighborhood break-ins. The camera itself was barely larger than a shirt button. I had checked it irregularly over the years, mostly forgetting it was there. I plugged the cable into my laptop and opened the archived footage, set the date filter to the previous Tuesday night. Eleanor appeared on the screen at 2:17 in the morning. She was wearing her robe and moving with the quiet, practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before. She went into my office, crossed to the desk without turning on the overhead light, and spent 11 minutes at the filing cabinet against the far wall before leaving the way she came. I watched the footage 3 times. Then I closed the laptop, went to the kitchen, and began making dinner as if the world had not just shifted 3 inches to the left beneath my feet. Eleanor mentioned the appointment, the way she mentioned most things. She had already decided not as a question, not quite as a statement, but as something that existed in the space between the two, where disagreement was technically possible but practically unlikely. "I made you a doctor's appointment for Thursday," she said. She was standing at the kitchen counter, slicing an apple, not looking at me. 2 o'clock, Dr. Harmon's office out on Fairview Road. I was at the table, with my coffee and the morning paper, and I kept my eyes on the page I was not reading. "I have a doctor," I said. "I've had the same doctor for 16 years. Dr. Harmon specializes in cognitive health," Eleanor said. "He comes very highly recommended. With everything you've been through lately, the stress, the disrupted sleep, I thought it would be good to have a proper evaluation, just to have a baseline." She set the apple slices on a plate and turned to face me with an expression of such careful, loving concern that a man who hadn't spent the previous night reviewing 11 minutes of security footage might have found it entirely convincing. "You've seemed tired, sweetheart. Forgetful." I mentioned it to Patricia at the garden club, and she said her husband saw Dr. Harmon last year and found it very reassuring. I looked up from the paper and met her eyes. "Thursday works fine," I said. She smiled and set the apple plate in front of me. What I did not tell Eleanor was that I had spent Wednesday evening on the phone with Gary Young, who had pulled the business registration for Harmon Cognitive Health Associates, and found that the practice had been incorporated 14 months ago, had no hospital affiliations, accepted no insurance, and listed a single physician on its medical board. I also did not tell her that Gary had cross-referenced Dr. Harmon's name against the Oregon Medical Board's public licensing database and found a valid license current, no disciplinary actions, but issued originally in Nevada, transferred to Oregon 18 months ago around the same time the practice opened. None of that was illegal. None of it was even particularly unusual. But it sat in my chest the way a splinter sits in a finger too small to see clearly, too present to ignore. The office on Fairview Road was in a low brick building set back from the street behind a small parking lot with 3 cars in it. The waiting room had the deliberate calm of a place designed to make people feel safe: soft chairs, neutral colors, a small waterfall feature on the side table that produced a sound I found immediately irritating. Dr. Harmon was 53 trim, with the kind of silver-templed good looks that suggested he was aware of them. His handshake was practiced firm without being aggressive, released at exactly the right moment. He smiled at me with the professional warmth of a man who had decided somewhere in his training that warmth was a tool. "Mr. Morgan," he said, "please sit down. I understand you've had quite an eventful few weeks." Eleanor sat in the chair beside me, slightly forward, her hands folded on her knee. The first portion of the appointment proceeded normally enough. Blood pressure, reflexes, the standard questions about sleep and diet and alcohol consumption. I answered everything accurately and watched Dr. Harmon write things down and did not ask what he was writing. Then the questions shifted. "Can you tell me what today's date is?" he asked. "November 7th, I said, 2024. "And can you tell me the current address where you reside?" I gave it to him. "How would you describe your ability to manage your own financial affairs at present?" I kept my voice entirely level. "I'd describe it as unchanged from how it's been for the past 40 years, I said. Eleanor reached over and put her hand on my arm. "He's been struggling a little with the paperwork lately," she said to Dr. Harmon, in the gentle, slightly apologetic tone of someone translating for a person who cannot quite translate for themselves. "He forgot to sign the quarterly tax documents last month. I had to handle them." "I didn't forget," I said pleasantly. "I was reviewing them." "Of course," Eleanor said, and smiled at me and then at Dr. Harmon, and the smile contained an entire conversation I was not invited to participate in. Dr. Harmon wrote something on his pad. "Mr. Morgan, do you sometimes find yourself confused about recent events, uncertain whether things happened the way you remember them?" "No," I said. "Do you rely on your wife for reminders about appointments, medications, daily tasks?" "I made my own appointments for 64 years before this one," I said. Eleanor made a small sound beside me, not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh. The sound a person makes when they are performing patience. The appointment ran 45 minutes. When it was over, Dr. Harmon shook my hand again and said he would be in touch with some follow-up materials, and Eleanor thanked him in the warm, specific way of someone who has had a previous conversation with the person they are thanking. In the car on the way home, she talked about dinner, whether I wanted soup or something heavier given the cold front moving in, whether Rebecca might want to join us or had mentioned any plans for the evening. I responded to each question in the correct sequence and watched the road and thought about the word baseline and what exactly Eleanor intended to use one for. That night, Rebecca had gone upstairs early, and Eleanor was in the living room with a book she had been on the same page of for 3 evenings running. I went to the kitchen on the pretext of making tea and stood at the counter going through the stack of mail I had collected from the box that afternoon. The 4th envelope was addressed to Eleanor. The return address was a law firm on Commercial Street, downtown Aldrich, and Fenn attorneys at law. The envelope was sealed, but its top right corner had been nicked the way envelopes get nicked when they are opened and resealed with less than complete care. I held it under the kitchen light and looked at the nick for a moment. Then I set the envelope on the counter, made my tea, and went back through the hallway. I paused at the living room doorway. Eleanor had turned a page. She looked up at me with the composed, familiar expression of a woman reading quietly in her own home. "Anything interesting in the mail?" she asked. "Grocery circular," I said. "And something for you from a law firm downtown." The pause before she answered was brief, barely a full second. But I had spent 35 years measuring pauses. "Probably the estate filing," she said. "I asked them to send an update." I nodded and went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and turned my phone over in my hands and thought about what kind of estate filing requires a cognitive evaluation, scheduled 14 months after the evaluating practice was incorporated. When I was certain Eleanor had come upstairs and her light had gone off, I went back to the kitchen. The envelope for Eleanor was still on the counter where I had left it. I picked it up and held it carefully and worked the flap open the rest of the way with a butter knife. Inside was a 4-page document. The header read, in clean black type, "Petition for guardianship of alleged incapacitated person, Vincent Raymond Morgan, filed with the probate court of Marion County, Oregon." I read the guardianship petition 3 times at the kitchen table before I put it back in the envelope, resealed the flap as cleanly as I could, and returned it to the exact position on the counter where I had found it. Then I went to my office, closed the door, and sat in the dark for a while without turning on the light. A guardianship petition under Oregon law initiates a legal process through the probate court, in which a petitioner, in this case Eleanor, argues that a named individual lacks the capacity to manage their own affairs and requires a court-appointed guardian to make decisions on their behalf. If granted, that guardian assumes legal control over the individual's finances, medical decisions, and daily life. The individual retains the right to contest the petition at a hearing. But the hearing is scheduled by the court, not by the individual being petitioned against, which means the first Vincent Raymond Morgan would officially know about this process would be the moment a court summons arrived at his door. Eleanor had filed it 11 days ago. I sat with that number for a long time. 11 days. She had been sitting across from me at dinner for 11 evenings, asking whether I wanted more coffee, commenting on the weather forecast, telling Rebecca about the history of the maple tree in the front yard. And the whole time a petition was working its way through the Marion County court system with my name on it. At 11:15, I picked up my phone and called Harold. He answered on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been asleep either. "I need to tell you something," I said. "I figured," he said. "Pour yourself a drink first." I didn't have a drink. I told him about the petition, instead reading him the relevant sections in a low voice with the office door closed. Harold listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him, and told me more about his reaction than anything he could have said. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Vince, I've been watching her for 3 weeks, since the night Rebecca arrived." His voice had the careful flatness of a man reporting facts he wishes were different. "She changed the locks on the garden shed the day after Rebecca got here. New padlock keyed differently from the house. And last Thursday, a man I didn't recognize came to the back gate while you and Rebecca were out. She met him there. They talked for maybe 10 minutes. She handed him something too far away to see what, and he left. Did you get a look at him?" "Enough of one," Harold said. 60s heavy set drove a white pickup with a cracked left taillight. I wrote it down. I wrote it down, too, in the notebook I had been keeping in my desk drawer. Then I said goodnight to Harold and sat for another few minutes in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, the way old houses do, the particular language of beams and pipes and floorboards that you learn over years of living somewhere until it becomes as familiar as breathing. Then I got up and went upstairs. Eleanor was deeply asleep, turned toward the window, her breathing slow and even. I stood in the doorway long enough to be certain, then crossed to the closet on her side of the room. I had been in this closet 1,000 times over 22 years. I knew its geography the way you know the geography of any space you have occupied long enough. The hanging clothes arranged by color the way she had always arranged them. The shoe rack along the left wall, the upper shelf with the folded sweaters and the small cedar blocks she placed among them to keep moths away. What I was looking for was not on the upper shelf. I checked the floor of the closet first, carefully moving nothing. Then I checked behind the hanging clothes at the back. Then I crouched down and looked at the baseboard along the rear wall, and that was where I found it, a section of baseboard that did not sit quite flush with the wall held by 2 screws that were slightly newer than the ones on either side. I had installed a false panel behind a baseboard in my own office years ago for documents I wanted secure but accessible. I recognized the work. I took out my pocket knife and removed the 2 screws, eased the panel out, and reached into the space behind it. My hand found a flat cardboard box, the kind department stores use for folded clothing. I lifted it out and carried it to the hallway, where the nightlight gave me enough light to work without waking Eleanor. Inside the box were photographs. Not loose photographs, organized ones sorted into labeled envelopes by year. The earliest was marked 1998. The most recent was marked 2023. I opened the 1998 envelope first. Inside were 3 photographs of a little girl, maybe 6 years old, photographed from a distance in what appeared to be a school playground. The child's face was turned partly away from the camera, but the dark hair was unmistakable. My hands began to shake. I opened the envelope marked 2005. A girl of 12 or 13 standing outside what appeared to be a public library backpack, over one shoulder, squinting into the sun. Same dark hair, grown longer. I could see, even in the grainy long-distance shot, the shape of her jaw. I opened 2015. A young woman in her early 20s outside a coffee shop, laughing at something on her phone. I opened 2023. Rebecca, unmistakably Rebecca, as I now knew her, walking down a sidewalk in a city I didn't recognize, carrying grocery bags, wearing the same gray wool coat she had worn to the bakery the morning she sat down across from me. I sat on the hallway floor with the box on my knees and the envelopes spread around me, and felt something move through me that was not quite grief and not quite rage, but lived in the country between them, vast and dark, and without a clear border. I heard Eleanor shift in the bed. "Vincent." Her voice came through the doorway, sleep-thickened, cautious. "What are you doing up?" I looked at the photographs in my hands. I looked at the bedroom doorway. I put the envelopes back into the box with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, slid the box behind me against the baseboard, and stood up. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Going to get some water." A pause from the bedroom, longer than it needed to be. "Come back to bed soon," Eleanor said. "I will," I said. I went downstairs to the kitchen and stood at the sink with the water running, and did not drink any of it. I had been awake since 4:30 and was on my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed on the kitchen table at 6:52 in the morning. Harold. The message was 4 words. "Turn on your computer." I carried my coffee to the office, sat down, and opened the laptop. Harold had sent a link in the follow-up message, no caption, just the URL. I clicked it and waited for the page to load, and then sat very still for a long time looking at what was on my screen. It was a video. 43 seconds. Posted to the Salem Community Facebook group at 6:18 that morning from an account with no profile photograph and a name I didn't recognize, PNW Family Advocates, with no prior posts, no followers, no history of any kind. The account had been created 4 days ago. The video was a recording of a recording slightly degraded the way audio degrades when it is captured on one device and played back on another. But the voice was clear enough. It was my voice, there was no question about that, the particular register and cadence of it, the way I dropped the ends of certain words. My voice speaking in the slow and slightly slurred rhythm of a man talking in his sleep. I stopped looking for her a long time ago. A pause. The sound of sheets moving. She's better off without me, wherever she is. Another pause. Longer. I never wanted her back. Not really. 43 seconds. Then it ended. The comments beneath the video numbered 214. I read the first dozen before I stopped reading. Because my hands had started doing something, I needed to use my attention to control. People I had known for 20 years. People whose children I had coached in Little League in the 90s, whose houses I had helped paint, whose casserole dishes had appeared on my porch after my wife died. Every single one of them certain with the absolute certainty of people who have heard something with their own ears, that the man they had known for decades had been lying to their faces for 30 years. My phone began to ring. I turned it face down on the desk. I sat with my elbows on the knees and my face in my hands and breathed through it the way I had learned to breathe through things that could not be immediately fixed, steadily, deliberately, buying time for the thinking part of my brain to catch up with the feeling part. Oregon is a two-party consent state. Under Oregon Revised Statute 165.540, recording a private conversation without the consent of all parties is a Class A misdemeanor carrying up to a year in county jail and a fine of $6,250. Whoever had recorded me sleeping in my own bedroom had committed a crime. The question was not whether that crime had occurred. The question was who had committed it and how I was going to prove it. There were two people in this house with access to my bedroom. One of them was my wife of 22 years, who had filed a guardianship petition against me 11 days ago. The other was my daughter, who had been typing messages on a phone she hid from me 3 weeks ago. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Eleanor first in the soft slippers she wore in the mornings, and then a different tread lighter, quicker, that I had been learning to recognize over the past month. Eleanor came into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open, the particular sound of the coffee maker being filled. Then she appeared in the office doorway, mug in hand, and looked at my face and then at my screen. "Oh my God," she said. She crossed the room in 4 steps and leaned over my shoulder, and I watched her read the comments the way I had been watching her face for weeks now, looking for the seam between what she was performing and what she actually felt. Her free hand went to her mouth. Her brow pulled together. "Vincent, who would do something like this?" "I don't know yet," I said. "This is horrible." She straightened up, pressing her fingers against her lips, shaking her head slowly. "These people, they don't understand what it sounds like when someone is talking in their sleep. They don't know the context." She put her hand on my shoulder. "We should call the police." "I'll handle it," I said. Her hand stayed on my shoulder for a moment. Then it lifted. Rebecca appeared in the doorway behind Eleanor, still in the gray sweatshirt, hair uncombed, holding her own coffee mug with both hands. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. The color in her face did something I watched happen in real time, a slow draining starting at her temples and moving downward. "Is that your voice?" she asked. "It's a recording of me sleeping," I said. "Edited." She looked at the screen for another moment, then looked at me directly. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were doing several things at once in the complicated mouth of someone processing information they already partially possess. "Did you really say that, in your heart, did you mean any of it?" I held her gaze. "Rebecca, I have spent 30 years and more money than I care to calculate looking for you. I have not slept a full night in 3 decades. I have a filing cabinet in that office with 40 pounds of case notes, dead ends, and your school photographs that I had computer-generated every 3 years because I did not know what you looked like, but I refused to stop looking. My voice stayed even. It cost me something to keep it that way. Whatever I said in my sleep, I cannot account for. What I did while I was awake is in that filing cabinet. Something moved in Rebecca's face. Not resolution, something more tentative than that something that was trying to decide whether to open or close. Eleanor was watching both of us. Harold called at 8:45. "I know it wasn't you," he said before I could speak. "I've known you for 14 years. You don't talk like that. Not awake, not asleep." His voice was rough at the edges the way it got when he was angry and trying not to be. "But Vince people are already talking. Sandra Marsh called me this morning. So did Pete Kowalski. This thing is moving fast." "I know," I said. "What do you need me to do?" I looked at the office doorway. Empty now. From the kitchen I could hear Eleanor moving dishes, the ordinary sounds of a morning, continuing as if nothing had cracked open underneath it. "Nothing yet," I said. "But stay close." I ended the call and looked at my computer screen. 279 comments now. The number had gone up 47 in the time it had taken me to talk to Harold. I thought about a phone being typed on quickly and then turned face down. I thought about 31 envelopes in a cardboard box behind a baseboard panel. I thought about a guardianship petition and a doctor who asked questions about financial competence and a back gate where a heavy-set man had received something from Eleanor's hands. Someone in this house had put a recording device in my bedroom. Someone had edited what they captured and posted it under a false account at 6 in the morning, before the town was fully awake, timed for maximum spread, before anyone who might defend me had a chance to respond. I was 65 years old, and I had built my entire adult life on the ability to look at a collection of facts and understand what they were telling me. I picked up my phone and called Gary Young. "Thursday is still on," I said when he answered, "but I need you to do something before then." The parking lot outside my office building on Commercial Street was empty at 7 in the morning, except for Gary Young's 10-year-old Subaru, parked directly under the lamppost nearest the entrance, the way a careful man parks when he is waiting. Somewhere he does not entirely feel safe. I pulled in beside him, and we went inside without speaking until the elevator doors closed behind us. Gary Young, at 34, looked approximately the same as Gary Young at 27, which was to say he looked like a man who had decided early in life that reliability was more interesting than charm, and had committed to that decision fully. Medium height, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of unremarkable face that people routinely forgot, and that I had always considered an underrated professional asset. He had been with my company for 7 years, and in 7 years I had never once caught him approximating a number. He had a file folder under his arm when we stepped off the elevator. He did not put it down until we were inside my office with the door closed and the blinds turned. "Mrs. Eleanor called the office yesterday afternoon," he said, setting the folder on my desk. "She asked my assistant if I had been in contact with you outside of normal business hours. My assistant said she didn't know." He adjusted his glasses. "I thought you should know that before we start." "She's watching The Office," I said. "She's watching something," Gary said. He opened the folder. Inside were printed spreadsheets, columns of figures with certain lines highlighted in yellow. He had the organized precision of a man who had rehearsed this presentation and wanted to get it right. "I've been going back through the archived records to 1996, he said. "The transfers I flagged for you on the phone, I've now traced all of them. They originate from a discretionary expense account that was set up in your company's name in March of 1996. The account is technically yours. Your name is on the founding documents, but the authorization signature on the setup paperwork is Mrs. Eleanor's. She set up an account in my name without my knowledge, I said, using a durable power of attorney document dated January of 1996, Gary said. He pulled a photocopy from the back of the folder and set it in front of me. A durable power of attorney, sometimes called a DPOA, is a legal instrument that authorizes one person to act on another's behalf in financial and legal matters. Unlike a standard power of attorney, a durable version remains valid even if the person who granted it becomes incapacitated. He paused. You signed this document, Mr. Morgan. Your signature is on page 3. I looked at page 3. My signature. The date, January 14th, 1996. 2 months after Rebecca disappeared. I don't remember signing this, I said. I didn't think you would, Gary said quietly. The notary stamp is from a firm that dissolved in 2003. I can't verify the signing conditions, but I can tell you that the document gave Mrs. Eleanor broad authority over your business finances, and she has been exercising that authority continuously for 28 years. I sat back in my chair and looked at the spreadsheets. 28 years. I had been drowning in grief in January of 1996. I had barely been sleeping, barely eating signing papers my attorney put in front of me without reading them, because reading required a kind of concentration that had simply stopped being available to me. Eleanor had been there through all of it, steady, organized, handling the things I could not handle. I had thought that was love. The receiving account, I said. Where did the money go? Gary turned to the next page. The transfers go to an account held under the name D. Pruitt Consulting, registered in Nevada. Over 28 years, the total transferred is $342,000. The amounts vary, sometimes $1,200, sometimes $3,000, but they follow a consistent pattern of staying below the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. He looked up at me over his glasses. That pattern is called structuring. Under federal law, deliberately breaking up transactions to avoid the currency transaction report requirement is a felony, specifically a violation of 31 U.S.C. 5324, carrying up to 5 years in federal prison per count. Dale Pruitt, I said. You know the name. He was interviewed by police in November of 1995. I said. He was in Hargrove Park the afternoon Rebecca disappeared. They couldn't hold him, no evidence. He had a prior record for document forgery. Gary was quiet for a moment. Mr. Morgan, he said, if Dale Pruitt was the man who handled the false adoption paperwork and Mrs. Eleanor has been paying him consistently for 28 years through a structured payment system designed to avoid federal detection, then what you're looking at is not embezzlement. What you're looking at is a payment schedule for ongoing silence. I looked at the highlighted columns. $1,200 here, $3,000 there. Every amount just under $10,000. 28 years of keeping Dale Pruitt quiet about what he had done and who had paid him to do it. My daughter had spent 30 years with a family chosen and arranged by the woman sitting in my kitchen right now, drinking coffee from the mug she kept on the left side of the cabinet, reading the same page of the same book she had been on for 4 evenings. There's one more thing, Gary said. He reached into the folder and produced a single printed page. I ran Dale Pruitt's name through the Oregon court system's public records database. He filed for bankruptcy in 2019. His listed address at the time of filing was a rental property in Medford. I called the county assessor's office this morning. He set the page down in front of me. The rental property is owned by a limited liability company registered in Nevada in 2006. The LLC's registered agent is listed as E. Hargrove, Eleanor's maiden name. She owned the building Dale Pruitt lived in. She had been paying him $342,000 over 28 years to stay quiet about a kidnapping she had arranged. and she owned the roof over his head as additional insurance. I looked at the page for a long time. Gary sat across from me and did not fill the silence with anything which I appreciated more than I could have told him. "Gary," I said finally, "I need you to make 2 copies of everything in that folder. 1 copy goes to a safety deposit box at a bank that is not the one this company uses. The other copy you keep at your home, not your apartment, your parents' house in Woodburn, the one with the detached garage." He nodded, unsurprised, as if he had already considered this. "And Gary," I met his eyes, "what she said to you about making sure you never worked in this state again. I want you to know that if this goes where I think it's going, that threat will not survive contact with what's in this folder." Gary Young picked up the folder and held it against his chest, the way a person holds something they understand the weight of. "I've been with this company for 7 years," he said. "I know who you are, Mr. Morgan." He stood. "I'll have the copies made by noon." After he left, I sat in my office for a long time looking at the window. Outside Commercial Street was coming to life a delivery truck, double parked across the street. A woman walking a dog the color of autumn leaves, 2 men in hard hats drinking coffee outside the building next door. All of it perfectly ordinary. All of it completely indifferent to the fact that the ground underneath my life had been hollow for 28 years. I picked up my phone and called Harold. "I need Miss Patricia's address," I said. "The retired social worker. You mentioned her at the beginning of all this." "Evergreen Senior Living," Harold said immediately. "Out on Turner Road." "Why?" "Because there's one more person who knows what happened in 1995, I said. "And I think she's been waiting a long time for someone to ask her." Evergreen Senior Living sat on Turner Road, behind a row of Douglas firs that had been there longer than the building, their roots lifting the edge of the parking lot in a slow, patient way that suggested they had no particular hurry and fully expected to win. I pulled in just after 2 in the afternoon and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the entrance. A woman in her 80s was being helped into a wheelchair near the front door by an aide in blue scrubs. A man about my age was carrying a poinsettia plant through the lobby. Ordinary Thursday afternoon. Nothing about it suggested that the answer to a 30-year question was waiting inside. The front desk directed me to the sunroom on the east side of the building. Patricia Owens was sitting in a wingback chair near the window, with a paperback novel face down on her knee and a cup of tea going cold on the table beside her. She was 68 years old, small and precise-looking, with white hair cut short, and the kind of still watchful eyes that belong to people who have spent careers paying attention to things other people miss. She looked up when I came through the door and studied my face for a moment, before I had introduced myself. "Mr. Morgan," she said, not a question. "You know who I am," I said. "I recognized you from the newspaper coverage in 1995. She gestured to the chair across from her. "I wondered when you'd come. Sit down. I'll have them bring more tea." I sat. She did not reach for the call button. She folded her hands on her knee and looked at me with the composed attention of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had made her peace with the weight of it. "You kept a copy of the file," I said. "I kept 2, she said. "One at home, one in a safe deposit box at a credit union in Kaiser. I renewed the box every year for 29 years. She paused. My husband thought I was eccentric. He stopped asking about it after the first decade. "Why did you keep them?" Patricia Owens was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the Douglas firs. "I processed hundreds of adoptions over 23 years, she said. Most of them were exactly what they appeared to be, families who wanted children, children who needed families, paperwork that reflected reality. This one was not." She looked back at me. "The file came across my desk in December of 1995. The child had been in a temporary placement facility in Eugene for 6 weeks. Standard procedure following a removal from the system, a child whose origins were unclear would typically wait 6 to 12 months for placement, sometimes longer, while the agency worked to establish legal status and verify that no biological family could be located. This one took 3 weeks, I said. 22 days, she said precisely. From the initial placement request to the signed adoption order. I have never in 23 years seen a legitimate adoption process completed in 22 days. The paperwork was technically complete. That was what made it difficult to challenge. Every form was present, every signature in the right place. But the forms had been filled out with a consistency that was too perfect. Real paperwork has corrections crossouts, dates that don't quite line up, because different people fill out different sections at different times. This looked like someone had filled out every form in a single sitting. She reached beside her chair and produced a manila envelope that she held on her lap without opening it yet. She had clearly decided in advance what she was going to show me and in what order. The judge's signature on the adoption order, she continued. I pulled the judge's signature from 3 other orders he'd signed that same month. The letter formations were different. Not dramatically, whoever did it was skilled. But the pressure points were wrong. A signature is partly muscle memory. You can copy the shape of letters, but you cannot easily copy where a person bears down and where they lift the pen. She set the envelope on the table between us. I flagged the discrepancy in my internal notes and submitted a query to my supervisor. 2 weeks later, I was told the file had been reviewed and found compliant. My supervisor did not return my calls after that. I looked at the envelope. Who brought the paperwork in? A woman, Patricia said. She identified herself as a family law attorney representing the prospective adoptive family. She was professional, well-prepared, had answers for every question I asked. She reached into the envelope and produced a photograph, a still image printed from what appeared to be security camera footage, grainy and slightly overexposed. A woman standing at a reception counter, 3/4 view, dark coat. This is from the agency's security system. December 9th, 1995. I took the photograph and held it under the light from the window. The woman at the counter was turned slightly away from the camera, but the angle was enough. The dark hair. The particular way she held her shoulders slightly forward, the posture of someone accustomed to being in charge of rooms. The coat was navy blue, not the pale cardigans she favored now, but the bone structure of the face was unmistakable. My chest did something that was not quite pain, and not quite relief, but lived in the narrow space between them, where a man ends up when he has found the thing he was looking for, and discovers it is worse than he imagined. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my wallet. Inside, behind my PI license and a folded gas receipt, I kept a photograph that I had carried for 22 years. Eleanor on the steps of the county courthouse the day we got our marriage license, 1994, squinting into the summer sun and laughing at something I had said. I placed it on the table beside the security still. Patricia Owens looked at both photographs for a long moment. The sunroom was quiet around us. Somewhere down the hall, a television was playing at low volume someone's afternoon program laugh track, muffled by distance. "That's her," Patricia said. Her voice was even certain, the voice of a woman making an identification she had been prepared to make for nearly 30 years. "That's the woman who brought the paperwork." My hands placed the photographs back on the table with a steadiness I did not feel anywhere else in my body. "Ms. Owens," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer." "You've had nothing but honest answers since you sat down," she said. "Would you be willing to provide a signed statement to law enforcement if it came to that?" Patricia Owens picked up her cold cup of tea, looked at it, and set it back down. She looked out at the Douglas firs. She looked at me. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "I renewed that safe deposit box every single year for 29 years. What do you think I was waiting for?" She reached into the manila envelope a second time and produced a document already printed on 3 pages, already signed at the bottom of each page, in her careful, precise handwriting, already dated with that day's date. She had written it before I arrived. Before I reveal the shocking evidence that brought this 30-year deception crashing down, comment, "Still here, right now, so I know you are tracking this case with me. Also, please note the following part of the story contains some fictionalized elements and may not be entirely accurate. If you prefer not to listen further, you are welcome to turn off the video right here." Eleanor left for her women's circle meeting at 6:45 the same way she left for everything, with her coat buttoned. Before she reached the door, her keys already in her hand, her goodbye delivered from the hallway rather than the room she was leaving. I watched her headlights back down the driveway from the kitchen window and waited until the red taillights disappeared around the corner of Caldwell Street before I moved. Rebecca was at the kitchen table, with a cup of tea she hadn't been drinking, turning it in small circles on the tabletop. She had been quieter than usual since the morning of the video. Not the controlled quiet she had arrived with, something rawer than that, less managed the quiet of a person who has started to suspect that the map they have been navigating by is wrong and does not yet know what to replace it with. I sat down across from her and put Patricia Owens's signed statement on the table between us. She looked at it without touching it. "What is this?" "A sworn statement from the social worker who processed your adoption paperwork in December of 1995, I said. She identified Eleanor as the woman who brought the documents to the agency. She has kept copies of the original file for 29 years because she believed the adoption was fraudulent. I kept my voice level and direct, the way I had learned to deliver hard information over 35 years, not softened, because softening it rarely helped, but paced carefully, one fact at a time. The adoption order was completed in 22 days. Standard process takes 6 to 12 months. The judge's signature was forged. Rebecca's hands had gone still around the teacup. She was looking at the statement now, reading it, her eyes moving steadily across Patricia Owens's careful handwriting. "The letters," she said. She looked up at me. "The ones I received. The ones that told me you had found me and didn't want me back." Her voice was controlled, but something underneath it was pulling hard against that control, the way a current pulls against a rope. "You're telling me Eleanor sent those?" "I believe so," I said. "I want to show you something." I led her down the hall to Eleanor's study, a room I had largely stayed out of for 22 years, because Eleanor had arranged it the way she arranged most things, with a pleasantness that made you feel unwelcome without saying so directly. A writing desk, a small bookshelf, a combination printer and scanner on the credenza along the left wall. The printer was a Hewlett-Packard model, 4 years old, connected to the house network. I sat down at the desk and woke the computer. Eleanor did not lock her computer, which had always struck me as the confidence of someone who believed they had nothing to find. Rebecca stood behind me and watched. I navigated to the printer's management software and opened the print history log. Every document printed from a networked printer is recorded in its log: the file name, the date and time, the number of pages, the user account that sent the print command. The log goes back as far as the printer's internal memory allows, which in this model was approximately 3 years. "The printer keeps a record of everything it's ever printed," I said. "File name, date, time. If Eleanor printed those letters from this machine, the log will show it." I scrolled back through 3 years of print history. Recipes, meeting agendas for the women's circle, a travel itinerary from 2 years ago, and then appearing at intervals of several months documents with no meaningful file names, strings of numbers, the kind of name a file gets when it is created in a temporary folder and printed without being saved. I cross-referenced the dates against the postmarks Rebecca remembered from the letters. 3 of them matched. "There," Rebecca said. Her finger came over my shoulder and pointed at the screen without touching it. "The way you point at something you are not yet ready to make contact with." I printed the log page and set it on the desk. Rebecca walked to the credenza and crouched down to look at the paper tray. She reached in and pulled out a single sheet from the bottom of the stack, old paper, slightly yellowed at the edges, with a faint watermark pattern in the lower right corner. She held it under the desk lamp. "This is the same paper," she said. Her voice had dropped to something barely above a murmur, not because she was trying to be quiet, but because that was all she had available at that moment. "The letters I got, they all had this mark in the corner. I used to think it was a printing error. I thought it was nothing." She held the paper in both hands and looked at the watermark, and I watched something happen in her face that I had no word for, not quite the moment of understanding, because I thought she had already understood. But the moment when understanding stops being intellectual and becomes physical, when it moves from your head into your chest and your hands and the backs of your knees. "She wrote them here," Rebecca said. "In this room. She printed them on this paper and mailed them to my house, and I read them at my kitchen table, and I believed every word." She set the paper down very carefully on the desk beside the print log. Her hands were shaking now, a fine tremor she was not trying to hide. "I changed everything I thought about you because of words she typed in this room." I did not reach for her. I had learned in 30 years of working with people in pain that there is a moment when a hand on a shoulder helps, and a moment when it intrudes, and this was not the moment for it. "Rebecca," I said. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were bright, and her jaw was rigid, and her hands were still trembling against the desk. "She used you," I said. "She used your grief and your anger, and every reasonable thing you felt about a father you thought had abandoned you, and she aimed all of it at me like a weapon. That is not something you did. That is something that was done to you 30 years before you walked into that bakery." Rebecca pressed both hands flat on the desk. Breathed in once deliberately, the way a person breathes when they are deciding not to come apart. "The letters go back further than 3 years," she said. "I started getting them when I was 17. "I know," I said. "Eleanor had a different printer before this one, but the paper is the same. Same supplier, same watermark. I've been looking at that mark in the lower right corner of documents in this house for 22 years and never thought to ask where it came from." From the driveway, a pair of headlights swept across the study window. Eleanor was home early. Eleanor did not come through the front door the way she normally did. She came through the side entrance off the garage, the one that opened directly into the hallway outside her study, which meant she was 3 feet from the doorway before either of us heard her key in the lock. I moved the print log off the desk and closed the printer management window on the computer, in the time it took her footsteps to cross the hallway tile. Rebecca stayed where she was beside the credenza, the sheet of watermarked paper still in her hand. I did not tell her to put it down. There was no longer a reason to hide what we had found, and I was done conducting this investigation from a crouch. Eleanor appeared in the doorway and stopped. She looked at me behind her desk. She looked at Rebecca beside her credenza. She looked at the paper in Rebecca's hand, and the print log still visible at the edge of the desk blotter, and the statement from Patricia Owens that I had not moved from the center of the desk. She took all of it in the way she took most things in, quickly, completely, without letting her face show the work of processing it. Then she set her purse on the hall table and walked into the room. "I came back early," she said. "Sandra wasn't feeling well." She sat in the armchair in the corner, the one she used when she read in the evenings, and crossed her ankles the way she always crossed them, and looked at us both with an expression I had seen her use in difficult conversations for 22 years. Measured, prepared. Slightly sorrowful the way a person looks when they are about to say something they wish they didn't have to. "Eleanor," I said. "Let me speak first," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. "Please." She looked at Rebecca. "Did he tell you why your mother really died?" she asked. "Did he tell you and that in the 2 years between your birth and the afternoon at the park, he was home for less than half of them? That he took cases that kept him away for weeks at a time because sitting in a house with an infant reminded him of everything he'd lost?" She paused, letting that settle. "Did he tell you that the night you were born, when your mother was hemorrhaging in that delivery room, he was 40 minutes away, working a surveillance job he could have handed to his partner?" Rebecca looked at me. Her expression asked a question she wasn't ready to say out loud. "I was working," I said. "That part is true. I have never forgiven myself for it." "He left her alone," Eleanor said, still looking at Rebecca, her voice carrying the gentle insistence of someone explaining something painful for another person's benefit. "He left both of you alone. And when you disappeared, he fell apart so completely that he couldn't function, and I held this family together for months before I realized he was never going to recover enough to be what either of us needed." "You filed a guardianship petition against him," Rebecca said. Her voice was flat. Eleanor's expression shifted just slightly, the adjustment of someone recalibrating. "I filed that petition because I was frightened," she said. "Because I watched the man I married spend 30 years destroying himself looking for a child who—" She stopped, chose her next words with visible care. "I did what I thought would protect him. By taking legal control of his finances and his medical decisions," Rebecca said. "By making sure someone responsible was in a position to make decisions when he couldn't." Eleanor turned to me now, and her voice changed register softer, more personal, the voice she used when we were alone. "Vincent, I know you're angry. I know how this looks. But you know me. 22 years. You know what I am." I looked at my wife of 22 years sitting in her reading chair, with her ankles crossed, and her hands folded, and her face arranged in the expression of a woman wrongly accused. And I thought about 31 envelopes in a cardboard box, and a payment schedule that had been running for 28 years, and a social worker who had renewed a safe deposit box annually for 29 years because she had known from the beginning that something was wrong. "I know what you are," I said. "I've known for about 3 weeks." Eleanor held my gaze for a moment. Then she reached into the pocket of her coat, still on. I noticed she had not taken it off, and produced a document. Single page folded in thirds. She set it on the arm of the chair and looked at Rebecca. "Before you decide how much to trust him," Eleanor said, "you should know that your father signed a legal declaration in 2002 stating that he believed you were deceased and wished to have your status recorded accordingly with the state. He signed it. His name, his signature witnessed and notarized." She unfolded the document and held it out toward Rebecca. "I've had this for over 20 years. I never used it because I didn't want to hurt him. But if he's going to stand there and pretend he spent 30 years looking for you with his whole heart, you deserve to know what he signed." Rebecca took the document. I watched her read it. I watched the conflict move across her face, the pull of it, the old suspicion waking up the part of her that had been built on the belief that I had abandoned her, straining toward this new piece of evidence like a plant toward the only light in the room. I spoke before she could look up. "Rebecca, look at the paper." She stopped. "Not the words, the paper itself. Look at the lower right corner." She turned the document slightly under the desk lamp, and her breath caught a sharp, involuntary sound, barely audible, the sound of a person whose body understands something a half second before their mind catches up. The watermark. The same faint pattern in the lower right corner. The same paper stock that sat in Eleanor's printer tray. The same paper the letters had been printed on for 30 years. Rebecca set the document on the desk beside the print log. She set it down the way you set down something you are finished with. Then she turned to look at Eleanor, and I watched the last of the calculated composure leave her face and be replaced by something that was neither grief nor fury, but contained the essential heat of both. "You forged his signature," Rebecca said, "the same way you forged the judge's signature on the adoption order, the same way you forged everything." Eleanor did not answer immediately. The room held the specific weight of a silence that is not empty, but full of 30 years and 31 envelopes, and $342,000, and a little girl in a red coat with wooden buttons who had been standing on a playground in Eugene 6 weeks after she disappeared from a park in Salem. Then Eleanor looked at me, and for the first time in 22 years, I saw something in her face that was not managed or arranged or performed. "I knew you would never love me," she said. "Not the way you loved her. Not the way you would have loved that child. I knew it from the beginning, and I married you anyway, and I spent 22 years being right about it." The room held her words for a long moment after she said them. "I knew you would never love me. Not the way you loved her." I had been a private investigator for 35 years. And in 35 years, I had sat across from people in the worst moments of their lives and listened to them say things that were true and things that were false and things that were both at the same time wound together so tightly that even the person saying them could not always tell the difference. Eleanor's voice saying those words had the quality of something true, the particular flatness of a real thing finally being said out loud, after a very long time of not being said. It did not change what she had done, but I felt the weight of it anyway. "Eleanor," I said, "whatever you felt, whatever was real between us, none of it explains what you did to her." I did not gesture toward Rebecca. I did not need to. She was 3 years old. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I know how old she was." "Then tell me what a 3-year-old child had done to deserve 30 years in a life she didn't choose." Eleanor stood up from the armchair. She moved to the window and stood with her back to us, looking out at the dark front yard, her arms crossed over her chest. When she spoke, her voice had lost the measured quality she had been maintaining. Something underneath it was fraying at the edges, the way things fray when they have been held at tension for too long. "I didn't plan for it to go on this long," she said. "In the beginning, I told myself it was temporary, that I would find a way to bring her back, to make it right, once things between you and me were once I knew we were solid." She pressed her fingers against the window glass. "But we were never solid. You never let us be. Every anniversary of that day in the park, you went somewhere I couldn't follow you. Every year she would have had a birthday, you were in that office with the door closed, and I was on the other side of it." Her voice broke on the last word, and she stopped, and when she continued, it was quieter. "I made a terrible choice, and then I made it again every day for 30 years, because there was never a moment when fixing it wouldn't have destroyed everything else." "So you destroyed us instead," Rebecca said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Eleanor turned from the window. She looked at Rebecca with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not the performed emotion, not the calculation, but something more naked than either of those things. The face of a person looking directly at the consequence of what they chose. "I sent money to your family every year," Eleanor said. "Not through Dale separately, anonymously. I made sure you went to a good school. I made sure the family had what they needed." Her chin lifted slightly. "I watched you grow up. Through photographs you took without my knowledge," Rebecca said. while you were sending letters telling me my father had abandoned me. Eleanor did not answer that. The money you sent to Dale Pruitt, I said. $342,000 over 28 years. Structured payments designed to stay below the federal reporting threshold. What was he holding over you? Eleanor looked at me. Something moved behind her eyes, the old calculation trying to find purchase, finding none. He knew too much, she said finally. After the adoption went through, he wanted more than we agreed. He said if I stopped paying, he would go to the police. Her shoulders dropped slightly, the particular drop of someone setting down a weight they have been carrying so long, they had forgotten they were carrying it. I paid him because it was easier than the alternative. And the guardianship petition, I said. The doctor's appointments. The cognitive evaluation that was never about my health. Eleanor was quiet. Eleanor. My voice was steady, and I needed it to stay that way. I need you to say it out loud. Not for me. For her. I looked at Rebecca, who was standing very still beside the credenza, with her arms at her sides and her eyes on Eleanor. She has spent 30 years believing a story you wrote. She deserves to hear the true one from the person who wrote it. Eleanor looked at Rebecca for a long time. The study was quiet around us. Outside, the maple tree in the front yard moved in the wind, its remaining leaves catching the streetlight. I arranged for the adoption in 1995, Eleanor said. Her voice was flat and deliberate, the voice of a person reciting something they have finally decided to stop running from. I paid Dale Pruitt to handle the paperwork and the placement. I hired someone to be at the park that afternoon. Your father did not abandon you. He did not know where you were. He has been looking for you every day since it happened. She stopped. Her throat moved. The letters I sent you were lies. All of them. He never found you and chose to leave you. I found you repeatedly and chose to keep you hidden. The silence that followed was not like other silences. It had a texture to it, a density, the way air feels different before a storm breaks. Rebecca pressed her hand flat against the credenza and held it there. Her knuckles went white. She breathed in through her nose one long, deliberate breath, and I watched her decide something in real time, watched the decision move through her body, from her chest outward to her hands and her jaw and the set of her shoulders. The assets, I said, bringing Eleanor back before she could retreat into the silence. The money you moved through the company account. The discretionary fund you set up with the power of attorney I don't remember signing. Where is it now? Eleanor looked at me. In her eyes was something I recognized from 35 years of interrogations, not the look of a person deciding whether to lie, but the look of a person realizing that lying is no longer useful. Most of it is in an account in Nevada, she said. Under the LLC. How much? She told me the number. Rebecca made a sound that was not quite a word. I kept my eyes on Eleanor. The guardianship petition, I said. You filed it because you knew I was getting close. The doctor's evaluation was supposed to establish that I lacked the capacity to manage my own affairs, which would have given you legal control over the investigation into your own conduct. I let that sit for a moment. It was very nearly a perfect plan. Eleanor looked at me and said nothing, and for once I believed that was exactly what she meant. I contacted the Marion County Sheriff's Office 2 days ago, I said. Gary Young provided them with the financial records yesterday morning. Patricia Owens submitted her statement by certified mail on Thursday afternoon. I paused. They will be here tomorrow morning. The color left Eleanor's face in a single visible wave. Eleanor did not go to bed that night. I knew she wouldn't. I had spent 35 years learning to predict what people do when they realize the walls are closing in, and the pattern was almost always the same. They moved, they gathered, they prepared to run. The only variable was how much time they thought they had and how much they were willing to leave behind. I gave her 40 minutes. Rebecca and I sat in the kitchen without speaking at length, the kind of sitting that is not uncomfortable because it is not really silence but a shared waiting. I made tea neither of us drank. The clock above the stove read 11:22. Rebecca had her hands wrapped around her mug, staring at the grain of the kitchen table the way you stare at something when you are not actually seeing it. She really watched me grow up, Rebecca said finally. Not a question, not an accusation, just a fact she was turning over, examining from different angles, trying to find the shape of it. Yes, I said, that might be the worst part. Her voice was quiet and certain. Not the letters. Not the adoption papers. The fact that she watched me and chose every single year to keep choosing what she had already chosen. She looked up at me. She could have stopped. At any point, for 30 years, she could have stopped. Yes, I said again, because it was true and there was nothing to add to it. At 11:58, I heard the door to the master bedroom open. Footsteps in the hall. Then the sound I had been listening for, the particular acoustic signature of the master bedroom closet, opening, the slight drag of the door across the carpet that had needed planing for 2 years. I looked at Rebecca. She looked at me. We went upstairs. Eleanor was on her knees in front of the open safe. The new one, the one she had bought 18 months ago to replace the old one, which I had noted when it appeared and asked about and been told was for important documents, insurance papers, things that needed protection. She had a canvas tote bag beside her on the floor, and her hands were moving quickly, pulling items from the safe and placing them in the bag with the focused efficiency of a person who has mentally rehearsed this moment. She heard us in the doorway, and her hands stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She knelt there for a moment, with her hands full of documents, and then she set them down in the bag and stood and faced us. The safe door hung open behind her. I could see inside from where I stood, stacks of documents, a USB drive, 2 passports, and in the far right corner, a bundle of cash held together with a rubber band thick enough to suggest the bundle was substantial. Eleanor, I said, I need you to let me leave, she said. Her voice was different from anything I had heard from her before, stripped of the layers, the performance, the management. It was the voice of someone who had stopped calculating and started simply speaking. I'll go. I'll transfer whatever is in the Nevada account back to your company. All of it. I'll sign whatever you need me to sign. I just need you to let me walk out of here tonight. Rebecca was standing slightly behind me and to my left. She said nothing. I could feel her stillness, the way you feel stillness when it is intentional. Gary Young gave the financial records to the sheriff's office yesterday morning, I said. Patricia Owens submitted her statement Thursday afternoon. The records from the adoption agency have been in their hands since this morning. I kept my voice even. There is nothing in that safe that they don't already have copies of. Eleanor looked at this bag. She looked at the safe. She looked at me. Then why are you here? She asked. If it's already done, why are you standing in this doorway? Because Rebecca deserved to see it, I said. All of it. Not a version of it, not the parts I decided to tell her. The actual thing. I looked at my wife of 22 years kneeling on the floor of our bedroom, beside a bag she had packed to run with, and I felt something that was neither hate nor love, but the hollow space that remains when both of those things have burned themselves out. She deserved to see who you really are when there's no one left to perform for. Eleanor's chin dropped slightly. Her shoulders followed. The bag sat on the floor between us with its open top and its contents visible, the documents, the USB, the passports, the cash. And she looked at it, and then looked away from it. The way you look away from a thing you cannot claim anymore. Rebecca stepped around me and walked to the safe. She stood in front of it and looked at the contents without touching anything. Then she reached in and took out a single item from the bottom left corner, a small photograph 3 inches by 5, the kind printed at a drugstore. She turned it over. It was a picture of Rebecca, at perhaps 8 years old, standing outside what appeared to be a school backpack over one shoulder, squinting into the sun. On the back, in Eleanor's handwriting, a date. October 1999. Rebecca held the photograph and looked at it, and her face did something that had no single name: grief and fury, and the particular devastation of understanding something fully for the first time. "You were there," Rebecca said. "In person. You took this yourself." Eleanor said nothing. And her silence this time was not the silence of a person calculating. It was the silence of a person who has nothing left. From downstairs came the sound I had been expecting. Since 11 o'clock, 3 firm knocks at the front door. The knock that is different from a neighbor's knock or a delivery. The knock that means what it means, regardless of the hour or the circumstances. I looked at Eleanor. "That's the sheriff," I said. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had gone out of them, the last of the management, the last of the performance, the 30-year architecture of a life built on a decision she had made before she fully understood what it would cost. She picked up the canvas bag and set it on the bed. She straightened her cardigan. She walked toward the door and stopped beside me in the doorway. "I did love you," she said. "Not to Rebecca, to me." "I know," I said. She went downstairs. I heard the front door open. I heard voices, professional, calm, the voices of people doing a job that needed doing. I heard Eleanor's voice among them, giving her name when asked for it. Rebecca was still holding the photograph from 1999. She turned it over in her hands once more, and then set it carefully on the dresser, face up, like something that needed to be seen rather than hidden. "What happens now?" she asked. I looked at the open safe, the bag on the bed, the photograph on the dresser. I looked at my daughter standing in the room where 30 years of evidence had just walked out in handcuffs. "Now," I said, "we go downstairs." Eleanor was already by the front door when we came downstairs, hands cuffed in front of her, one deputy reading her rights, while the other stood by the window. She had found somewhere between the bedroom and the front door a composure that was not performance, at the composure of someone who has finally arrived at the place they have been moving toward, and finds it almost a relief. "Tauha." She looked at me once across the room. Neither of us spoke. Everything that needed saying had already been said upstairs. The deputy with the paperwork asked me to sign a statement confirming I had cooperated voluntarily with the investigation. I signed it. He gave me a case number and said someone would be in contact within 48 hours. Then they led Eleanor out through the front door and down the porch steps to the patrol car at the curb. I watched through this window as it pulled away down Caldwell Street and turned the corner and was gone. Harold was on his front porch in his robe and slippers, arms folded against the November cold. He looked at me across the yard. I nodded once. He nodded back. That was sufficient. I closed the front door. Rebecca was standing in the middle of the living room, looking at the space Eleanor had occupied. The room felt cleaner the way a room feels after a window has been opened. "She turned me into a weapon," Rebecca said. 30 years making me into something she could aim at you." "Yes," I said. She looked at her hands. "The recording in your room, that was me. I put the phone there. I made the account. I posted the video." "I know," I said. She looked up. "You knew," I suspected from the night it posted. "You had access. You had motive. And that morning at the kitchen table, you asked me whether I meant what I said in the video." I held her gaze. "You didn't ask who had done it." Her shoulders dropped. When she looked up, the last of the armor was gone. "I'm sorry," she said. Just that. Nothing around it. "You were given a story," I said, "built over 30 years specifically so you would believe it. What you did with that story is something we can talk about. But the story was not your fault." Her eyes went bright. On the coffee table, half hidden under a displaced book, was a dark blue spine with gold lettering, worn soft from handling. My first wife's journal, taken from my filing cabinet during the confusion of the evening. I looked at Rebecca. Her eyes were already on it. "Did you take that out?" I asked. She nodded. "I didn't open it. I just wanted to see it." She looked at me. "Is that her handwriting on the cover?" "Yes," I said. "Yes," I said. "That's her handwriting." Rebecca looked at the journal on the coffee table but did not reach for it. She sat with her hands pressed together in her lap, fingers interlaced, holding on to something that wasn't there. "There is also a letter," I said. She looked up. "She wrote it the night before you were born. She knew something was wrong, and she asked the nurse for paper, and she wrote to you and gave it to me to keep." I went to the filing cabinet and took out the pale blue envelope that had been in the locked bottom drawer since 1992. Rebecca's name on the front, slightly faded, entirely legible. I have kept it since the night she gave it to me. I set it on the coffee table beside the journal. Rebecca looked at her own name in her mother's handwriting for a long time. Then she picked up the envelope. "I'll give you some privacy," I said. "No." The word came out before she had decided to say it. "Please stay." She opened it carefully. 2 pages, pale blue ink, the handwriting slightly uneven, written in a hospital bed in the middle of the night. She read without speaking. After a while, she made a small sound she hadn't planned on and pressed her free hand flat against her chest. When she finished, she looked at the ceiling with her jaw working and her eyes full. "She said she hoped I would always know I was wanted," Rebecca said. "That the wanting doesn't stop when a person stops." Her voice broke. "She said she trusted you completely." I was beside her before I had decided to move. She turned into my shoulder the way children do without hesitation, and I held my daughter in my living room while the November wind moved through the maple tree outside, and the street was quiet, and the patrol car was long gone. She cried for a long time. I held on. When she finally stilled, she wiped her face and looked at me. "I don't know how to say I'm sorry in a way that means what I need it to mean," she said. "You don't have to find the right words tonight," I said. "We have time." She had fallen asleep on the couch, her mother's letter still pressed against her chest. I made coffee without waking her. Then I went to the storage room and carried out 6 cardboard boxes, one per half-decade, stacked them in a semicircle on the living room floor, and sat in the armchair to wait. When Rebecca stirred at 6:40 and saw them, she sat up slowly. "What is all this?" she asked. 30 years, I said. I opened the first box. Hundreds of missing person flyers bundled by year each with a photograph of Rebecca at 3 years old in the center. The earliest were printed on a dot matrix printer. The later ones used age progression software, a forensic technique that updates a child's estimated appearance as they age. I had printed new batches every 6 months and distributed them myself. Gas stations, grocery stores, police precincts in Salem and Portland and Eugene. The second box held 19 composition notebooks. Case notes, dense and small, filling every line. Dates, names, dead ends. The last entry was from August of this year. The third box held 22 years of invoices from private investigation firms. The fourth held 312 letters to law enforcement agencies and missing persons registries across the country. The fifth box held the age progression photographs. Rebecca picked up the image from 2022 herself at 30 and held it beside her face. "You knew what I would look like," she said. "I was afraid to hope," I said. "That's why I didn't recognize you at first." She set the image down and looked at the sixth box. Inside, wrapped in old flannel, were 32 birthday cards, one for every August 15th. Bought, written, never sent. She opened this year's. "Read it." Her shoulders shook once hard. She looked up at me with her eyes full. "You never missed a single one," she said. "No," I said. "I never did." At 7:30, I stood up and said, "There's something I want to show you." She followed me upstairs without asking what it was. I walked to the end of the hall and put my hand on the knob of the door that had been closed for 30 years. I held it for a moment, the way I always held it, not quite turning, not quite letting go. Then I turned it and pushed it open. The room was exactly as it had been in November of 1995. Yellow quilt. Shelf of picture books and stuffed animals. The mobile of painted wooden stars turning slowly in the air from the opened door. On the nightstand, the photograph of her mother holding a newborn, laughing at something she would never see coming. Rebecca stood in the doorway and looked at all of it without speaking. Then she crossed to the shelf, picked up the old stuffed rabbit, and carried it to the bed. She sat on the edge of the yellow quilt and looked at me still standing in the doorway. "You've been standing in doorways a lot," she said. "This is your room," I said. "I didn't want to take up space in it before you decided what to do with it." She looked at the space beside her on the quilt. "You can come in," she said. I sat beside her. The mobile turned overhead. Outside the window, the maple tree moved in the early morning wind. "I don't know how to be your daughter," she said. "I don't know where to start." "Neither do I," said. "But I've had 30 years of practice at the waiting part. We can figure out the rest from here." She set the rabbit on the nightstand beside her mother's photograph. The two of them together looked like something that had finally found the right place. Neither of us moved to leave. Behind us, the door was open. For the first time in 30 years, it was going to stay that way. I lost her once because of what Eleanor did. I nearly lost her a second time because of the hatred Eleanor spent 30 years planting in both of us. That is what stays with me most. Not the forged documents, not the money, not even the 30 years of searching. What stays is how close we came to destroying each other with a story that was never ours to begin with. I believe God kept that door open, the one at the end of the hall, the one I could never bring myself to close, because some things are meant to find their way back, no matter how long it takes. If this family drama revenge story taught me anything, it is this: do not be like me. Do not let grief make you blind to the people standing right in front of you. Do not hand your life over to someone simply because they are willing to hold it. Trust is not the same as loyalty. And love, real love, does not keep secrets that cost another person 30 years. These family stories revenge us, not with violence, but with truth. The truth always surfaces. It always does. Rebecca and I are still learning how to be father and daughter. We may spend the rest of our lives learning. But we are learning together, and that is enough. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements created for educational purposes. If this type of content is not for you, feel free to step away and find something that fits you better. Your time matters, and so does your peace of mind.